Welcome to episode 22 of the Pollination Podcast. In today's episode, I'll be going over the mistakes as well as the successes that I made in the business in 2024, as well as my plans going forward for the future. Thanks for joining me on this episode, guys, on the Pollination Podcast. This has been an episode that I've wanted to do for a long time. I almost wish I had done it last year, but, better late than never. I want to do an episode like this once a year at the end of the year. And for me, I kind of consider the end of the year for the business is sort of when the bees are coming back from California. So that's usually around mid-March or so. Then I can kind of look back and see really how effective was the previous year. Since pollination is one of our primary revenue streams, I really never know how well we're doing until I see how California plays out. So thankfully, the bees are on their way back, and we know that we've made great and everything is all well and good for the business. So I'm going to do this end of year review, and I'm just listing a lot of mistakes that I've made as a beekeeper and with the business. I'm going to talk about some of my successes, but I'm going to harp a lot more on the mistakes just because I find that to be a lot more useful for myself as well as anyone else. And I'll talk a little bit about what I'm planning to do with the business for 2025. And I think this episode could be really interesting to go back, maybe March of 2026, and then I can talk about whether I hit those goals or not, and then I can start comparing the results from 2024 to 2025. So this will hopefully be a regular thing around this time period. So yeah, again, thanks for joining me. This is the 2024 end of review by the Pollination Podcast. So here, if anybody's watching this, and I'll tell you this too, I think this episode is really going to be better to watch the video on just because I'm doing like a PowerPoint presentation. There's a lot of notes. There's a lot of just figures and dates. And if you're listening, I don't know, it might be hard for that to really sink in. So I'm writing everything down here on the PowerPoint. I'm just going to read the PowerPoint. So you can just sort of follow along if you want. Or if you want to just go back and pause one of the screens. I think I do have some pretty useful information on some of these slides. I'm going to try not to ramble too much. I'm going to try to just sort of read through the slides and get going. And yeah, I don't know. I hope this will be a pretty useful episode for everybody. And yeah, we're just going to get started here. I want to say also I've broken down this presentation into different sections, and they follow the same pattern for both the mistakes as well as the successes. I'll do, cells. I'm talking about mated queens. We're going to talk about our experience with nukes, with California. And that way there'll be a little bit of a format for this, and I can just sort of duplicate this format going forward, and I can compare the results from, this year to next year and just kind of keep this same pattern here for the presentation. So if you're just listening to audio, I'm just going to read this off. I really do actually recommend maybe watching this on video, and we're just going to get started here. So this first section of the episode is primarily just talking about mistakes. There are some notes that I've taken as well, like our graph percentages and stuff, but generally most of these are going to be errors that I made. So the first section here is talking about queen cells. And we actually started grafting in 2024, way too early. We started grafting in January, and we got really terrible results. I mean, just a handful of cells. Most of them were not capped. I find January is just way too early to graft. In February, on February the 11th, I grafted around 8 to 12 bars, and we typically put about 15 to 20 cell cups per bar across 4 queenless starters and 4 queen-right finishers, and we were only getting about 5 to 20 cells out of that many, and that's quite a bit of grafts to be getting such a low quantity. The cells were being started just fine, but the finishers were not capping them off by day 5, and if the cells aren't capped at day 5, I don't try to leave them in there another day and hope they get capped. Usually they don't, or the queen's got an issue and doesn't hatch. I find it better, if they're not capped by day 5, to just pinch the cells and start over. It's just not worth risking any problems with those queens, because those queens are going to just be the foundation of a good colony. On February the 17th, we were able to get 79 queen cells off 12 bars, and over 50 of those cells were very small. I remember because we grafted those for some customers, and I was very nervous about selling them to the customers because some of them weren't much bigger than your fingernail. Although I did find out later that they hatched and the queens were just fine, and they said the queens weren't even really that small. So the customers were happy with those. And you see now we're getting into like mid-February, and I found that mid-February is about the earliest we usually want to start grafting, although we started 2 weeks later this year because I'll talk about that with the mated queens. There's a reason. Just because you can get queen cells doesn't mean you should be making queen cells. That's just really like one part of the process of raising queens. So, and I want to say too, if anybody's just listening, these are all notes that I take. I have a notepad on my phone and I stop what I'm doing if I see something interesting, or I'll take some numbers and I always stop and write those notes. So all these notes are from like, if I'm giving a date, that's literally the date I stopped. I wrote those notes down and I just transfer those notes over to this PowerPoint presentation. So this is like a snapshot, I guess, back in time of my mindset and what was going on in the apiary. I have also written here that I need to stop selling queen cells to the public come June. We were getting between an 80% to a 90% success on grafts until the end of May. By late June, we're getting between 0% and at best a 50% take on the grafts. The cell failure started at the beginning of June when temperatures hit 90 degrees. And when I say that, I mean like literally it had just hit 90 degrees outside and our grafts started plummeting. And now in June, we still have plenty of pollen coming in. So it's not a pollen deficiency yet. Yeah, there's not as much. It's tapering off from May, but to drop from getting, 80, 90% in late spring to, even a month later to getting between 0 and 50, that's more than just a pollen just being reduced. So I think the high temperatures probably had something to do with that. In August, we had almost zero cell production for that entire month. Now that I do blame on the fact that we had a total dearth. So we had obviously no nectar coming in August. We had no pollen coming in August. I was feeding them corn syrup, even though I'm usually pretty anti-pollen supplement. I did suck it up and bought like a box of pollen patties to see if we could get make any difference with the grafts. We definitely did not. It was also extremely hot in August. It was 100 degrees outside. The heat index was actually 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and it was devastating, the grafts. I mean, we may as well have not even wasted our time, but we still tried to graft every single week. Tried all kinds of things, tried putting them in the shade. We put tents over them, shut down the cloak board, started making 4-frame queenless starters in the woods, and honestly, really got nothing. I think this year we'll try again, but probably best just to not even try to make cells in August. I noticed that the pollen patties had absolutely no impact on cell production whatsoever. The only thing it had an impact on was, besides my pocketbook, was we bred enormous amounts of hive beetles. August is already really bad for hive beetles. Having pollen patties in there were way worse. So I really hate pollen patties myself over here, and just didn't do us any good whatsoever. Just actually, it only hurt the hives. I have wrote down in the notes that maybe I could save frames of pollen or bee bread, maybe in my deep freezer. Just save a few frames just to keep some cells limping along. I am going to try that this year because I think that might help. Maybe also, we make some smaller hives. I wonder if those cloak boards just get too hot. I'm not really sure. We're going to tinker with it. But I'm kind of budgeting to not produce any queens in August just because of what we saw last year. On September the 12th, I began to get about a 50% take on grafts again, with the occasional hive getting close to 100%, and that's just off 1 or 2 bars, so not a lot of cells. Fall pollen started coming in at the beginning of September. I mean, I remember it was like first few days of September, the pollen started trickling in, and the more pollen that started coming in, the better the grafts got. And then it stayed that way, honestly, through most of the winter. We really just kind of June, July, August was really when we really got hit hard with cell production. And then deeper into September, honestly, all the way through December near about, we were still able to produce queen cells. On November the 8th, I had an 80% success on our grafts, but the cells were very small. November the 30th, I was still getting a 70 to 80% success on the grafts. So that's for cells. This next page here is we're talking about mated queens. And I learned a lot about what not to do with queen breeding last year, and that's mostly jump the gun. It's better to wait. I've got a lot of upset customers with me right now because we pushed queen production back an entire month, more or less, from last year. But based off the notes that I have here, there's a clear reason for it. and I'm just not going to produce subpar queens. I refuse to. We could make some quick money, but it would devastate my reputation, and the customers would just rake me over the coals. So I would rather have them upset by them having to wait a few more weeks for a queen, but get a good queen, than to rush them out and then get upset because that queen gets, superseded or something a few weeks down the line. I wrote that queens that were mated, that doesn't mean hatched, that doesn't mean caged, that means they went on their mating flight. So they were already out of the cell. They go on their mating flights a few days or a week after they hatch, give or take. And queens that were mated in February up until the middle of March were terrible. I mean, really terrible. Spotty brood patterns, they were drone layers, supersedure cells were commonplace. The early queens were not drawing foundation and were producing very little honey. It was a massive, massive error. This is one of the biggest mistakes that I made all year. And I noticed that after mid-March, the ones that made it around mid-March, after mid-March, those queens were great. They really were. But mid-March was the limitation. And that's why we're grafting at the beginning of March this year. So by the time those cells hatch in a couple weeks and then the queens go on their mating flight, there'll definitely be post mid-March mating flights. So I can really reduce the risk that they're not going to mate well. On August the 20th, I made 40 nukes with cells, and they were 90% successful. But 1 week later, mating plummeted to 25 to 50%. Just 1 week difference into August. You go from a 90% success down to a 25 to 50% success on your mating flights with the cells. So again, I think that goes back to more likely the pollen deficiency. Then that's kind of coupled. That, you see, that just double hit us. We lost a lot of cells, our cell production, or we lost 100% of our cell production. And then we were getting at best like 50% mating on the few cells we were able to, that we had. So it was just, August is just a really rough time to do queens. I don't recommend even trying to use queens. I don't recommend buying queens that were mated in August. By September the 6th, our mating was averaging about 50%. And all the way into November, on November the 8th, we were still getting about 50% mating rate. So I put a cell on there. It's like flipping a coin whether that queen mates. Doesn't even mean the queen's great. It just means she's fertile. When I go in there and check like 3 weeks later, when there should be cap brood. So still pretty bad, but not terrible. I mean, depending on, what you consider to be successful. A lot of mating flights, 90% is really nice, but in reality, you're going to get more like 70, maybe 80%. So 50 is not good, but it's not horrible as long as you plan for it. And that's kind of what we're planning for this year. We'll probably keep raising queens in the fall. I just have to expect I'm only going to get like 50% queens out of the mating nukes that I have. The minis were all those mini styrofoam nukes. They were still alive too. They were still doing pretty good even into November, early November. But by November the 30th, we had lost up to 75% of the minis. And we had 200 minis last year. I rebuilt them all at the beginning of September, made sure they had bees, they had a cell, they had everything they need. But I didn't rebuild them after that. I didn't add brood, I didn't add bees. I literally just caged the queen at 3 weeks and gave them another cell and a shot of syrup if they were hungry, and that's all I did. And so we had up to 200 in the beginning of September, and then by the end of November, we had, I don't know what that is, 25 nukes or something, or 25, 50, I guess that would be about 50 minis. We were still getting around 50% mating success. I wrote that it's probably not worth running any more minis so late into November, unless I just haven't finished requeening the apiary. There's really no need to make splits that late near December, but requeening is still possible. I recommended keeping the minis going until the first round of almond grading is finished at the end of November. And I say that because that's when I really go through all the hives with a fine-tooth comb, pick out the good ones. They're going to go to California, or I hope so. So it's always nice to have a few good queens around in November just to pinch the bad ones. Even if I have another 100 queens and I can get them to take, that might be another 100 colonies that can go to California, and that's 25% of a semi. So I still think it's worth keeping some queens around in November just for me, just for California. And I wrote it's probably best to rebuild the minis at the beginning of September again and then just write them out. About a dozen minis overwintered with only a little effort on my part, but were not worth it. Better to rebuild them at the start of spring. And I say that because it just takes 1 cup of bees and a queen cell and a little bit of syrup, and that's all it takes. When you're trying to overwinter them, I mean, most of them are going to die. Most of them turned into drone layers, actually, I found since after I wrote these notes. Or, yeah, drone layers, lane workers. Actually, most of them didn't really even make it out of those dozen or so. And the ones that did already popped off and swarmed, now that the pollen's coming in. So it just really was not worth it. Better just use them till you need to use them and then just shake the bees out. I'd go ahead and just cut the comb off in my case because I don't have a good place to store it and it's going to get ruined by wax moss or just it'll get too brittle too just sitting over winter. I just cut everything out and start fresh beginning of in March when we're making queens. I think that's what I'm going to do going forward. So the next section here is about nukes. I wrote that on March 21st. We made 100 nukes by that point in the season, and 35 out of the 100 nukes that I made mid-February were strong enough to sell to customers, and because we were selling nukes last year. And to me, a nuke I'm selling to customers needs to have 3 brood, 2 honey. So you can see that's a pretty terrible results. That's like a 30% success rate. And again, it's because those queens weren't mating very well. Most of those queens turned out to be really crappy. A lot of them had supersedure cells that got triggered and started the whole requeening process. We ended up with a lot of drone layers and quite a few laying workers. It was really devastating to try and make those queens too early. My advice kind of to myself going forward is I need to keep nukes available to sell to the public, but in the spring, but I need to probably shut down into summer. I think trying to keep nukes alive in the summer was a mistake. Nukes should be shut down sometime in May and moved to deep boxes to allow for growth before the summer dearth hits. Nuke sales are highest in the spring, and then they taper off as we get deeper into summer. You lose a ton of nukes in summer, especially in August during that dearth and high mite period and high beetle period, and that it really can offset the profit that you made from selling the nukes in spring. And the summer nukes, they're not going to make any honey. You're going to have to medicate them. You're going to have to feed them. You're going to have to take care of them. So they start taking up, not on top of dying, so they end up taking up a ton of time and labor and resources. And some of them will build up in time for California, especially if you can put them on cotton and get a flow. And some of them won't. And, half of them are probably going to die, honestly, in my experience. So I think if we do sell nukes again, I'm going to maybe run them into May and then shut down so they can catch a little bit of the honey flow before summer hits. And because the summer nukes were just not worth it. And fall nukes were definitely not worth it. Nuke profitability appears to be lower when selling to the public than reinvesting back into one's own apiary. That's why I'm not selling nukes this year. You lose good comb, honey production, pollination revenue, and have a lower spring hive count, which is the most profitable type of hive. Selling nukes are probably best if that is your chosen form of revenue, so that's your main focus, or you don't want to expand your hive numbers, or you just need a quick cash. And that's usually why we sold hives or nukes in the past. I just needed quick money, waiting on that California check to come in, or we didn't send enough to California, or we sent them to California and didn't get paid for them because the broker didn't like them or whatever. I find that selling nukes are really profitable short term, but they are not profitable in the long term. And that's just a conclusion. We've been selling nukes now for, I don't know, at least 5 years, maybe longer. It was our first primary revenue stream for us, and for many years it was our best revenue stream until we hit California. But now I just see all the negative sides of selling it, and I just don't really want to deal with it anymore. I think it's better just to reinvest those hives back into my own apiary. This next page here is about requeening. This was a major mistake that I made last year. What I did is I requeened with queen cells at the beginning of spring. I remember the very first week of February, and it resulted in high hive mortality due to poor mating. I lost roughly 50% of the hives that didn't go to California due to requeening with cells. We only sent one semi to California, and we probably had about 1,000 colonies. So that was 600 colonies, give or take, that we left behind. So we lost like 300 of the 600 hives that we still had left here due to me going in there and pinching the old queens, which were bad, but they could have held down that box because spring was here. And I rushed with the queen cells, and I lost 300 colonies. That's not even counting the nukes that I lost that I was building for customers. And we built hundreds and hundreds of nukes early in the season. So we lost a ton of hives due to bad mating because I rushed trying to make queens with queen cells and it was a terrible mistake, which again is why we are not selling queens or even trying to make queens until probably mid-April. So I can guarantee those suckers are great. Well, we're making them, starting to make them now in mid-March, but they'll be ready to cage mid-April. And this is why this thing, I got PTSD from flipping up drone layers and laying workers and queenless colonies. I will never do that again, ever again. The 50% of colonies that successfully requeened had to be requeened a second time later in the season, which resulted in an even higher mortality rate and little to no honey production from several hundred hives. Need to requeen with mated queens only, and that is what we will do this year. I will make all of my initial splits with queen cells, but I am not requeening those last year's queens until I have my own mated queens to go in there and pinch, because a mated queen I can get like a 90% take. And I'm not gonna have that huge loss. I might lose 10% of the ones I try to requeen if I can get to them in spring, when when you can replace queens more easily, and that's an acceptable number as long as and you make a few I try to build 10% extra colonies to offset the 10% that I'm going to lose to requeening, and I still think it's worth losing 10% of the hives to requeen, because those new queens, I hope, should be significantly better than a queen that's, a year old. And that's kind of how we try to requeen every single year. This was one of the worst mistakes I made in 2024. It really was. It was really terrible. Next section here is splits. Splits made from California hives, so that's the hives that came back probably around mid-March from California from the almond pollination, were far more successful than splits made with early hives left locally. This is probably due to California hives not returning until mid-March, so better mating rates, which is what we're trying to do again this year. Not again, we're just doing it right this year. We did it wrong last year. Splits made after August were unprofitable. Yeah, and they really were. They didn't make honey. They didn't draw any foundation. Had to dump tons of mite medication into them, tons of corn syrup, take care of them, and only a fraction of them built up in time to go to almonds. Fall splits were even more so less profitable. And the only reason I would do fall splits going forward is just if my hive numbers are dangerously low. Like, I like to hit spring with at least 1,000 healthy colonies. So, I will do some fall splits if I, have lost that many, if I've fallen under 1,000. And fall splits appear to be best to keep your hive numbers up. Or if you want to sell overwintered nukes, that's also an option. But they're not really going to be nearly as profitable as spring nukes, unless you really jack the price up. So if I sell a spring nuke for $150, I would probably sell an overwintered nuke for $200. And that's just because you got to take care of them and feed them, and you're going to lose some. So they're just not very profitable. I do have a friend that does overwintered nukes, and he sells them. He takes them up north and delivers them. I don't know what his pricing is or anything. He's not told me, but I know he does that every year. He moves hundreds of nukes up north to those northern beekeepers, and I'm sure they're jacking the price up and selling them, because there's no way in heck, they're making nukes up far up north when we're just not even really able to make them here either, because he's selling those things sometimes in like March. So that is a business option, but I think it's better to wait to start splitting until the California hives come back, which is about mid-March. I didn't see any significant difference in hive strength from overwintered fall splits compared to fresh splits that I made in March. I would almost argue the March splits would probably be better, because there's going to be a lot more drones. Those queens are probably going to make better than a fall queen. Although fall queens can be really good, they're not going to hold a candle to a nice, well-mated spring queen. On November the 30th, I started making same yard splits. So if I had a dead out on a pallet somewhere, I lost a few colonies in a bee yard, I was just rebuilding those empty spots, those dead spots on the pallet, with hives from that same location. So you get a lot of drift back, but it's possible if you build them strong. And September the 30th, those same yard splits, I was getting about 90% success with mated queens, but I only had about a 50% success with cells. Same yard splits to rebuild dead outs are an option, as long as they are built strong, are given mated queens, and ideally during some type of flow. Nectar and pollen are great, but at least a pollen flow can really help, because then you can always give them a little syrup, and that'll increase your acceptance rates. I personally find it a better option. I mean, I'm kind of on the fence about it, but I kind of am leaning towards it's better to just rebuild a yard that's had some dead outs versus picking that yard up and then going to pick up another yard that had a lot of dead outs and then moving them to a third location, to consolidate them so that yard's full, right? You don't want to be driving 20 minutes to go work 2 hives if you've had a big die-off. You want to keep enough. Like I like to keep at least 48 colonies in a yard. If I can keep 96 colonies, that's even better. When I start getting down to like 20 colonies in a yard, it's like, man, is that really worth the fuel and the time to go to them? Probably not. So I'm going to do same yard splits again this year, but I'm strictly going to do them with mated queens only. So feed was a huge mistake that I made. If you guys watch my vlog on my other YouTube channel, you saw I made a ton of videos about this. On November the 22nd, hives that were fed solid corn syrups, that's fresh off the truck, no water added at all, they became either honey bound or they actually starved, believe it or not, with 2 gallons of solid corn syrup on top of them, depending on the hive strength. The small colonies couldn't take and process that thick syrup, and the strong colonies that could take it were actually weakened because it plugged out the brood nest. The queen had no room to lay, so thereby just shrinking their population. So that was a bad mistake. Solid corn syrup was just a terrible idea. And I found that hives that were fed a 2-to-1 syrup, which is, 2 parts sugar, 1 part water, are having similar issues, but not quite as bad. I think a 2-to-1 syrup ratio was okay, but that would not go any thicker. Hives that were fed a 1-to-1 or even a 1 part sugar to 2 parts water, which we tried this year, were faring best for population growth, but only if they had enough feed stored to sustain them for at least a month between feedings, because it takes me a month to get to my colonies. So even though they might grow faster with a really thin syrup, they also might starve faster too. Well, they will starve faster. It's not even an if. So you have to kind of balance that and see how long it's going to take you to get between colonies. Make sure they have enough food, but not too much food. What I recommend and what I'm going to do this year is probably giving them a 2 parts sugar to 1 part water 2-gallon bucket in August after we've pulled honey, and then slowly thinning that syrup down for the rest of the year, probably ending at a 1 part sugar to 2 part water mixture to grow the hives for California. I think that's the game plan. Feeding too thick syrup was the second worst mistake I made in 2024. It really was. Next slide is California. So we're putting colonies under 6 frame populations. Excuse me, I did put colonies that were less than 6 frame populations on mustard fields this winter, and they showed very little to pretty much no growth. What I noticed were hives that had at least a 6 frame average grew on the mustard as long as they had the comb available to go up there and they had space to lay. They weren't honey bound or pollen bound or anything. You need to move strong colonies that can make great in California to mustard and consolidate the small hives to a different location. I recommend putting a full semi-load. This is me talking to myself here. I recommend putting a full semi-load of 400 hives in a strong mustard yard over winter to reduce staging time and high preparations for California. So again, if you guys saw my vlog, you saw how stinking irritated I was this year because one of my almond brokers gave me a day to put a semi together, and I had to fight them to even get 2 days because one day wasn't possible. If I've already got a semi 400 hives sitting in a yard, it'd be a lot easier for me just to grab those things and move them over to pallets. And I might even be able, I have some mustard locations I can get semi trucks already in there. I could just load them in the mustard yard. Having like 24 locations where I'm running over here and I'm grabbing 5 hives in that yard and 20 hives in that yard and 30 hives in that yard, bringing them all back here to the house, then putting them on pallets and working them and medicating them and regrading them and blah, blah, blah. That is a ton of time. And I think it was very unprofessional to give me only a day or two to put a semi together. I'm still deeply irritated about that. It's never happened before, but since it's happened once, it can happen again. And if we don't find a different broker for next year, I could be in that same position. So this is kind of me covering my butt for California. I need to mark all the hives, and I recommend you do this too if you're doing California, to mark all the hives that are 6 frame populations and above in November. I do a whole round of grading for California in November. These are the hives that are very likely to make it to almonds. Then you can use all of December to boost the smaller colonies with extra brood to get them to be at least 6 framers. 5 frame colonies and weaker are very unlikely to grow without direct beekeeper intervention. And when I say to grow, I mean grow enough to get to California. 6 frame minimum, 8 frame average is what you want. Ideally, 8 frames and above are really nice. And I just noticed that everything that was 5 frames or less, they just didn't grow without me directly adding brood over the winter. They're doing great now in March. They weren't doing great, by the time I had to send them to California in January. Miscellaneous notes here that I wrote to myself. I don't expect any foundation to be drawn after August, even with heavy feeding. I put a lot of deep boxes of foundation, of good brand new foundation too, on hives in August, and I thought I could feed them a thin syrup and they might draw it out. And we did have a tiny bit of foundation drawn when the goldenrod was blooming, and I think it was October or so, but it was like partial frames. In the end, it was not worth it. And then I had to go take all those boxes back off before we shipped them to California. Or when it started getting really cold, I think that top empty box of foundation was drawing all the heat off the brood nest, and those hives really started crashing on me. So, you know what? When we pull honey in July, I just give up on foundation. If there's foundation in the apiary, it's going to be there till next spring, or unless you have a hive that dies and you can pull it out. That was kind of a mistake, but I kind of did it as a test, so it's okay. I learned it really was not worth the effort. I also noticed that weak hives that were broken down to singles at the end of fall grew much more than over-supered colonies. If over-supering is necessary to protect comb, then at least put the brood box on top so the bees can get to the bucket during cold weather. This will have a negative impact on hive growth, however, and I noticed that. My issue is I don't have a lot of storage space, especially for comb. So if I don't want to like put it in my tiny little barn in the wax moss get it for the winter. So I'll keep a small colony that should be a single. And I'll throw a small box, preferably a medium box comb, but sometimes I do deep boxes of comb underneath it. I need to make sure that empty box is beneath it. When the empty box was on top, again, I think it pulled all the heat off the brood nest when it got cold, and those bees would not leave the brood nest to go through an entire box of empty comb to get up to the bucket. So we actually had a lot of hives starve to death with buckets on their heads just because I didn't have the feed directly on around the brood nest. Now, if you have an internal feeder, that's not an issue, but I would still put the brood box on top just because of the heat issue. You want the heat to rise up around that brood nest. These little slides here are a little quicker. These are the successes that I had in 2024. As far as cells are concerned, we doubled our cell production from 2023, and we fully converted over to a cloak board system, which I personally think is superior to the starter finisher combo that we had been using for years prior. Mated queens, we increased mating nukes from having less than 100 in 2023, which the majority were 3-frame queen castles, which I despise. I'll never run queen castles again. They really had terrible results with those. So we increased from less than 100 mating nukes in 2023 to 400 5-frame nukes and 200 mini. So we were running kind of at tops, I think, about 600 mating nukes last year. So pretty big increase for us. And I still could not produce enough queens for myself until summer. That's how big the demand was. The customer demand was. That's why we expanded again, so I can sell more and I can have some for myself. But 600 mating nukes was not enough to hit the customer demand here. We successfully built queen-right queen banks for the first time, allowing for increased queen production and faster customer fulfillment with fewer resources invested in the bank. Prior to that, just the year prior, we had started banking queens, I believe, in 2023. And we were doing queenless queen banks, but you have to constantly dump brood in them, right? Because there's no queen. We tried like a queen-right queen bank, and I wasted I think we ended up killing like 400 queens when I was trying to figure out the queen-right queen bank. So massive loss. Got terrified of ever messing with it. Gave up on it in 2023, and I went back at it in 2024 because everybody told me it should work, and eventually we were able to get it to work. And honestly, we could bank 50 to 100 queens in a strong queen-right queen bank, and I typically would lose less than 10% of the queens that I banked over a week or two time period, which I personally consider to be pretty decent, at least for me. Especially we were getting much higher failure rates the year prior. So that allowed me to have a lot of queens ready. So when I got a big order from a commercial customer, I had those queens ready. I could handle larger orders because we had queens stored up because we weren't producing a whole lot of queens, even with 600 mating nukes. So that was really nice. And when you had, the hobby customer comes to the house, I didn't have to go dig around in 2 or 3 nukes to find them one queen, kind of with them standing over your shoulder and talking to you and stuff. I could just walk over to the bank, grab a queen in a cage, hand them to them, and they were happy. I personally think short-term queen banking is better than caging queens fresh because especially with a queen white man, I'm getting tongue tied. With a queen right queen bank, there's already a queen there, so the bees don't feel desperate to need a queen like they would in a queenless queen bank. So I think they're more selective of which queens they'll take care of. So if you have a queen in there that's got poor pheromone performance, I think they're just going to ignore her. And usually after 3 days, you'll see like a little initial die off of the queens. I assume they're kind of selecting the worst queens. That's what I think. I don't know that, but that's what I found. I've had fewer issues with customers if I bank the queens for a few days to a week. I kind of find that banking them for longer than a week, definitely no more than 2 weeks. If you bank too much for too long, that's not good for the queens. Short-term queen banking, definitely good. Nukes. We doubled our nuke sales from 2023 and began to offer wholesale prices and delivery options. So we started selling to other, commercial beekeepers, sideliner beekeepers. A lot of them were buying them real cheap and they were reselling them is what they were doing. Kind of irritated me because sometimes the guys didn't want to hardly pay any money at all for them, and then they would turn around and like not quite double the price we sold them to them, but it felt like they were doubling the price. I don't like wholesaling nukes, again, just because even on a full price nuke, in my opinion, you're losing money in the long term. When you sell them wholesale, man, you're shooting yourself in the foot twice, in my opinion. I don't want to do that anymore. Honey production doubled from 2023. We started selling hive equipment to the public. We've always sold like starter kits, it'd be a deep box and a queen excluder and a medium box and for honey and a lid and a bottom board. We always sold those to the new customers. The new beekeepers really liked it. We'd have it all built and painted and ready to go. I'd even put the nuke in there if they wanted. And they really liked that. But now since we're ordering larger quantities of equipment, I would set aside some deep boxes or medium boxes or frames or whatever, and we could sell those to the public. There's already an equipment seller in the town next door, so that's not like a booming part of our business, but it's something that I do want to invest and grow over time. I see a lot of potential with it, and we just need more storage space, so that's why we're kind of not pushing too hard on it. I just got to get a little more place to store, because if you want to sell equipment, you obviously have to buy pallets of it at a wholesale price, and it can sit there for quite a long time before you're able to move it. Our hive mortality, we had a 50% hive mortality in 2024. I only have that in the success field because that's always been our hive mortality. I think the national average for hive mortality for commercial beekeepers is about 50%. I know it used to be kind of closer to 40, but I believe it's inched on up to 50 now. So that makes me an average beekeeper, I guess, but I'd rather be average than be bad. So I want to improve on that, but so I don't know. We lost about as many hives as we normally lose. I'm going to consider that a win. That definitely could have been worse. As far as honey sales go, we got our first food permit and we began selling it in a local hardware store down the road. We began selling our honey at local markets every weekend, which significantly boosted our profit margin on honey. We did not sell to honey packers for the first time in 2024, and we began to sell our honey wholesale to the public. So that means we're just selling 55-gallon barrels to other beekeepers. They usually bottle and resell it, is what they're doing for it. That significantly increased our profit margin on our honey because Barkman Honey, which is the main honey packer in my area, was paying $1.50 per pound for wildflower honey in 2024, while the national average was $2.80 per pound. So huge difference. And so we just set our honey at whatever the national average price. I feel like that's fair. If it's the national price, that's what we're going to be charging, and was worth a lot more. I mean, it's taken near about a year to sell it off, but we have almost sold it off, and it's really made us a lot more money doing everything. We upgraded our website and we began selling honey nationally online. We also began selling on Etsy and Amazon. This also significantly increased our profit margin on our honey and began to build a customer base outside of our immediate area. And that has been true. So selling honey online, we meet and greet. We meet other customers in other states. Some of those customers are buying queens from me now. If I was delivering nukes, they would have bought nukes from me. So that has kind of widened our net there on people who know that I exist outside of just right here in the Panhandle. So that's been really good. For California, we doubled our 2023 pollination revenue because we sent 2 semis to almonds instead of 1. We actually more than doubled it because we didn't get paid for 60 of the hives that were on 2023 semi, and now we got paid for 2 full semis. And actually, we stuck an extra 100 hives on one of the semis. So we actually way more than doubled now that I'm thinking about it. So that's been really fantastic. That's opened a lot of doors for us, financially speaking, for the business this year. As far as social media goes, I added video to the podcast, which you might be watching now. I also started doing Zoom interviews for the Pollination podcast, and I've seen an increase in viewership, which has been really nice. As soon as I added video, more people started watching it because nobody really was paying much attention to the podcast, to be honest, outside of just, friends and family and small beekeepers in the area, that kind of watch it. So that was really cool. And I'll just make a little plug here too. If anybody ever wants to be on the Pollination podcast and do a Zoom interview, definitely let me know. I'm always looking to schedule other people. I don't care your age or your experience level. Doesn't matter. Just everybody's has a unique perspective, and I love to hear it. So you can always message me if you ever do want to be on the podcast. I'd love to have you. I also started Walk in the Woods Apiary vlog, which I was very uncertain about. That's my other YouTube channel. It's a weekly YouTube channel, and it actually is blown up quite a bit. I mean, not blown up in the sense that I'm a big YouTuber. I'm definitely not. We just got 1,000 subscribers. We just got monetized like a week ago, which is really cool. I don't think I'll make much money with 1,000 subscribers, but it's kind of nice to be paid for all the effort that I put in to make those videos, because I know it looks simple, but I spend a lot of time filming and editing. So that's been really cool. And really, every other aspect of the business has increased because of that vlog channel that I made. Like, we're getting queen calls all the time. People go, "Oh, I followed your YouTube channel," and they're ordering honey from us in other states. We started selling all over the country. And every now and then somebody will be like, "Oh yeah, I found you on YouTube," and they buy that thing. So it has been, even though we just got monetized, we've made a lot of money from that YouTube channel just from the pure advertisement aspect of it. So that's been really exciting. We're almost at the end here. And these are my goals going forward for 2025 for this year. So as far as queen cells go, we're still running 16 clugboard hives, which we should average, once we get up and running properly, should be able to produce about 500 to 600 cells per week with those 16 clugboard hives. I'm also going to supplement the clugboard hives with starter and finisher hives to boost production as necessary. So right now, I'm starving for queen cells. The first round of grafting wasn't good at all. Second round looks much better. Still not quite where I want. So we're going to build a bunch of starter finisher hives just to get my numbers up so I can fill all my mating get all those mating nukes populated, start making splits with the California bees that are coming back, and then I'll shut down the additional colonies. We just will keep the 16 clugboard hives. That works pretty well for us. For mated queens, we're only running 3-frame minis this year. I'm really unhappy with the build quality of the 4-frame styrofoam minis, which is mostly what we have, because the bees, there's weak spots in that design, and the bees chew out all the time. Actually, I just built like, I don't even know what it was, 50 or something the other night. Most of the bees chewed out while they were sealed up. So I'm going in with a hot glue gun to try and seal up, to reinforce the weak spots on those 4 frames so we can keep going. But we're totally converting over to a 3-frame mini. They're going to swarm. They might swarm faster, but they won't chew out. And that's kind of the give and take thing. We're increasing from 200 minis this year to 700 minis. We've already got them ordered. We're painting them. We're assembling them. So that's kind of it's not even a goal. That has happened really already. And if we get a lot of demand for queens, we might increase the minis. We're going to be caging queens at 3 weeks old. That's when there's cat brood present, as long as cat brood is present, and we're going to bank them. So that should significantly increase queen production compared to caging mostly to order in 2024. And that's pretty much what we did. I waited for someone to call me last year, and they said, "Hey, I need 100 queens." I went out there and caged 100 queens. It was a nightmare, especially because most beekeepers are impatient, and they wanted them like the next day. "Hey, man, can I be there at 6 o'clock in the morning and get 100 queens?" And they'd call me like 5 o'clock at night. So physically impossible. We lost a lot of orders, and I got so stinking irritated with that. And that's why I pushed so hard to get the queen bank under control and figure it out. So this year, we're just going to go cage those things, and I'm going to put them in the bank. And if I don't sell them, I'll go use them myself. So we're going to constantly yank those queens out of there every 3 weeks, which is what you have to do with the minis anyways, because they'll swarm. You don't have an option. You can't leave those queens in there longer than 3 weeks with the minis. So hopefully we'll have a nice surplus of queens, always banked, rotating the old ones out, adding the new ones in, steady supply, and then I can handle those big orders, the big commercial beekeepers that'll call them on 500 queens at a time. It might be feasible for me to make that happen this year, and that would be pretty awesome. I'm going to supplement queen production with 5-frame nukes as necessary. So when the bees come back from California, I'm going to build a bunch of 5-frame nukes just to stop them from swarming, because I'm sure they're about to swarm as soon as they hit the ground. And, even though it might take 15 minutes to find a queen in a 5-frame nuke and cager, that's why we go to the minis, because it takes, honestly, just 1 minute. I can still have some there as backup. And of course, they're not going to swarm out of a 5-frame nuke near as quick as they're going to swarm out of those little 3-frame minis. So I kind of have it in my head that I really want to run 1,000 mating nukes this year, 700 minis, and maybe at least 300 5-frame nukes, but we'll see. That's kind of my rough plan. We still have a long ways to go. We're going to push queen shipping orders really hard this year to try and grow a larger national customer base. I've already got a lot of shipped orders, so we're already kind of hitting that goal. A lot of it's because of the vlog YouTube channel, so it's really exciting. I hope that's going to grow as I make some more videos with the queens, as we're caging them and stuff. I think that's going to be really great. Nukes, we're not planning on selling nukes this year to reinvest. That way I can reinvest the hives back into our own apiary to grow our numbers. This will hopefully increase the odds of sending 2 semis next year to almonds, as well as increase honey production. Because we did send 2 semis to California this year, but it was really close. It could have gone the other way. And some of the hives were a little small. They were acceptable this year because there was a massive shortage over there. So they weren't too picky. They were still actually a little pickier than I was expecting, but we made great. It worked. But that's the main reason I'm really keeping the nukes into the business, is so I can guarantee we can send those 2 semis to California, because I can already see in the budget this year that we've got a lot of play in the budget that we've never had before this early in the year, because we sent 2 semis. So that is something I really want to budget for going forward. And I think to make that happen, I just can't sell nukes, not at least this year. Packages. I am thinking about experimenting with packages. I think it would go really well hand in hand with the mated queens that we're doing, just because a package is just, it's just 3 pounds of bees and a mated queen in a cage. Plus, we're already shipping queens through UPS Next Day Air. So I'm already making regular trips to the UPS, center to drop off the queens. Why not have a few packages with me too? They seem like they go hand in hand. Plus, as I'm building those mini mating nukes, you just have to shake a lot of bees in a shaker box that I bought this year. So if I have extra bees, as I'm building the minis, why not just shake them in a package box and add a queen and be able to sell them? I mean, I'm also adding those extra bees to the cell builders, so it all works out. But it's just another option that, to me, feels like it goes hand in hand with the queen business or packages. And then I wouldn't have to worry about losing my comb like I do when I sell a nuke. It seems better, and that way I don't have to 100% lose that nuke income. I can still get a little bit, because packages you can't sell them for as much as a nuke. But I don't think they would have such a detrimental impact on all like honey production in California and stuff, at least if I just sell a few. So I don't know. It's kind of a thought right now, and we'll see how it goes. I definitely want to expand storefront honey sales. So we're going to push for more physical locations they'll sell our honey in. We're just in one store. We've had a second store offer it. We just haven't had time to bottle and get over there. I want to find more, because we have a food permit, and that sucker is expensive to maintain because we're renting a commercial grade kitchen. And as of right now, we're not selling enough in stores to offset the cost of having that permit. So that's a problem. But it's also been on me. I just need to go out and start talking, knock on some doors and talk to store owners. I haven't made that effort. So that's on me, and I hope to increase that a little bit. We definitely want to expand our market honey sales. We want to start doing more markets, just because it's just super profitable to sell when we bottle the honey ourselves. Markets are our highest profit margin locations to sell honey at, definitely, because when you sell through a store, they're going to take a cut. When you sell online, they take a cut. When you sell to the market, it's about as close to 100% profit as you can get, minus the cost of the bottle, lid, and label. So, if I'm selling honey for $10 a pound and the bottle, lid, and label's $1.50, that means I'm making like $8.50 per pound, if I did my math correctly. When you think that the national average is $2.80 per pound, or that Barkman wanted to pay $1.50 per pound, that's a massive increase in profit margin. So that I really want to focus on. We do want to try expanding hive equipment sales as well. Like I said, we started selling it last year. Still don't have a lot of storage space, so it's not like I'm going to corner the market or anything. I just want to keep growing it slowly and see how that really does for the business. That's kind of a new thing for us. Hive count. This year, the goal is to max out my hive equipment this spring, which should allow me to split beyond 2,000 hives. Spring colonies are the most profitable colonies of the year and most likely to make great almonds. I will supplement hive numbers by making summer splits only if necessary and avoid fall splits at all costs. My goals for California are to send 2 semis again to almonds and make grade on them. And finally, the social media goals are to continue to grow both the Pollination Podcast, which I hope you're listening to, and Walk in the Woods Apiary Vlog. I believe a strong social media presence will yield some of the greatest returns on a long-term investment. I think the social media investment, we will gain more than any other aspect of our business. I think it's going to have the greatest increase than anything else. Not in the sense that I'm just going to grow and get more followers, subscribers, or anything, but because I think the more people see me and hear me and can see, like with the vlog, you're kind of seeing through my own eyes. The podcast, you're just listening to me talk for really long periods of time. People get a feel for you, if you're a good person or not, and, your knowledge as a beekeeper or whatever. And I think that helps them relate to you, and then they're more likely to do business with you. And so I think really putting myself out there more on social media is just going to really grow the business in every way possible, and probably in ways I can't even imagine. It's going to open up all kinds of new opportunities. I've met so many cool people all over the world, and we just got started with social media really we've got a Facebook page for years, but nothing significant. So I'm really excited to see how social media is going to play out for us. And that's it, guys. If you're watching, thanks for watching. If you're listening, I know that was a heck of a lot of numbers and stuff for me to throw at you, but and that's kind of it. And it's my first time trying the slideshow thing. You'll have to let me know if that's good. You don't have to stare at my face so long, and then the information is also on the screen, and it allows me to kind of type it out and get my thoughts in order versus me rambling for 2 hours and only spitting out a couple facts. Although I'm sure I rambled plenty. And that's it, guys. So thanks so much for listening to episode 22 of the Pollination Podcast, and I'll catch you guys next month. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Pollination Podcast. I'm Matthew Walker from Walk in the Woods Apiary. We hope we have answered a few of your beekeeping and pollinator questions. Please share your questions and comments to our Facebook page at the Pollination Podcast.